My name is Jason Brooks. I'm a Vice President of Marketing Science at Lieberman Research Worldwide, also known as LRW, based in Los Angeles. I've been with the company for about a dozen years, working in marketing science capacity, but I've also played a key role in leading our developing virtual reality capabilities that we've been working with over the past 4 years. I should also say, at least for the purposes of this recording, that I'm just getting over a bad cold, so if I sniffle or cough or otherwise sound stuffy, my apologies. So I'm going to be talking about 5 lessons or tips for conducting market research using virtual reality. And it's important for me to at least specify from the top what I mean by virtual reality. That's a bit of a loaded term, especially lately. And, you know, if you talk to philosophers or psychologists, some will say that all reality is virtual reality, right? That none of us perceive the world in cold, objective terms. Our reality is always being filtered through expectations and biases and our emotions and so on. Or when we read a book or watch a TV show, you know, that is stimulating a certain virtual reality for us. And I'm not going to be talking about any of that when I say virtual reality, nor will I mean the type of virtual reality that entails looking at a computer screen and interacting with a 3D environment, say with a mouse. I'm going to be talking about exclusively 3D immersive virtual reality. That is to say, the type that involves putting goggles on someone's head, stimulating their senses with a screen, tracking where they're looking, where they're moving, and rendering an environment back to their senses. And it's important for me to just talk a little bit about how we even got to working within virtual reality at LRW. It's sort of a non-obvious path. We didn't start into virtual reality to simulate virtual shopping or anything like that. We fell into it quite simply by accident, really, by way of what we call pragmatic brain science. So about 4 to 5 years ago, we formed something called the Pragmatic Brain Science Institute. I was a part of that sort of founding committee. And this was created by a handful of us with cognitive or social psychology backgrounds. I'm an almost PhD in applied cognitive psychology. My colleague and founder of the Pragmatic Brain Science Institute has a former life as a social psychology PhD. And in forming this was all about taking tools, techniques, and paradigms from our former lives, some tools and techniques that have been around for decades in addressing the role of the non-conscious and emotions in human behavior, and adapting that to market research, adapting that to the problems that our clients face with consumer behavior. And as part of this institute, we established partnerships with academics from several different universities. University of California, Ann Arbor, one of the best social science research institutions in the United States, Stanford, USC, Syracuse, and several others. And these were all with academics who were actively practicing in social and cognitive psychology who could keep our methods sharp and fresh. And along the way, we started working with 2 of the world's leading experts in virtual reality for human behavior research. One person at UCSB by the name of Jim Blaskovich, considered one of the founders of virtual reality research, and the other, Jeremy Bailenson, up at Stanford, who is considered the leading authority right now in the use of virtual reality for human behavior work. And it was through working with them that they really taught us about how this tool could be used to stimulate non-conscious and emotional cues that are present in the real world. And we started sort of working with virtual reality almost as a prop at first to kind of better understand the role of the non-conscious and emotions in consumer decision-making. And then we eventually started adopting it as a real tool for doing certain types of market research. And so we've been doing that now over the past 4 years. And I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking through sort of 5 lessons or 5 tips that we've learned along the way in about 4 years of applying virtual reality for market research. And some of these lessons we've frankly learned the hard way by really experimenting and sort of leading the way in this in many respects. So the first lesson is about realism. Don't chase the dragon of realism, and that just simply means don't fixate on creating a perfect graphical representation of the world you're looking to stimulate. That is sort of akin to creating a video game or a movie, and there's just so many ways to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of headache on something that really doesn't meet your key objectives, needs of the research, and is also something that can backfire on you by actually messing up virtual reality's ability to actually stimulate presence. Now, what do I mean by presence? Presence is sort of the golden metric in virtual reality. It is the sense that somebody is having an emotional response to a simulation that mimics the emotional response they would have in the real world. And many people sort of innocently think that with virtual reality, it's all about the graphics. You know, if it looks, the more real it looks, the more you stimulate presence. And what we know from the decades worth of academic research in this, by the world's leading experts in human behavior work with virtual reality, is that graphics are actually one of the least important factors stimulating presence. What's most important is actually tracking where people are looking, where they're moving, doing that over 100 times a second without lag, and rendering an environment back to their senses in a way that mimics how that real world will be rendered back to their senses. And if I do that correctly, if that environment just responds the way it does when I move and move my head around in the real world, I can put someone in a cartoon environment, and in under a minute, they will be responding to that in a high presence fashion. And in fact, chasing realism too far can even work against you by slowing down your computer's ability to render that environment back without lag, without delay. And sometimes even cause people to overly fixate on why that world doesn't look perfect. So, you know, we don't need to have the kind of budgets for like a big Hollywood movie like Avatar. We need to focus on the objectives and figure what are the key things we need to do to stimulate presence for our research project. So here's an example of an environment from a study we did for our pharmaceutical client, where their information needs were around how someone would emotionally respond to a pitch from a pharmacy counter for an alternative type of drug treatment. And so we didn't set about creating this beautifully realistic grocery store. You can see this kind of looks cartoony. We spent a little bit more time creating some detail around the pharmacy counter because that's what we wanted to stimulate the relevant non-conscious emotional cues when someone is standing at the pharmacy counter waiting for their prescription drugs refilled. And then we actually filmed an actress in stereoscopic 3D video who came in portraying a pharmacist who then actually had this interaction with the respondent about their prescription drug refill. And so the whole point of this was we focused the reality of the experience on the things that mattered most for stimulating presence that was essential to this client's business objective. Okay, the next lesson, forget the feet. So, you know, walking around is really cool in virtual reality. You know, it does stimulate presence, but the fact of the matter is it's extremely cumbersome, it's time consuming, and it can be very expensive. You've got cables that you have to manage that might be hanging from the ceiling where somebody might have to carry behind somebody. You have to make sure they're not walking into walls. You need to make sure they're not tripping over each other. The equipment that is needed is very expensive. And so we found that enabling walking around is actually rarely essential for the information needs of our research. So instead, we would recommend to consider a standing or seated experience where you're just tracking the position of someone's shoulders and head movements. So you allow a little bit of motion, you allow them to look wherever they'd like, and you perhaps enhance their ability to move or interact with an environment using either a little controller or maybe a mouse, or using gazed-based control, which is actually where people look where they want to go. And this just limits or satisfies a whole bunch of just logistics that are entailed with walking around. Here are some pictures from some early work we did in virtual reality when we had people walking around. And you can see you need labor there, you need staff that needs to ensure the safety of people. I've shepherded personally over 1,000 people through virtual reality experiences, and I can say, yes, you will have people that will trip, that will fall, that will get tangled up in. And you need expensive systems that track where people are walking. Here is instead a snapshot from a study we did where we had people simply just sit and look around, 3 people at a time. This is in a beautiful focus group facility. And we just allowed them to do some simple interactions and movements using a mouse. So vastly more efficient and really allowed us to hit our objectives for this study. Okay, lesson 3, make sure to POP. And that's my little acronym for properly orienting the participant. And this really breaks down into sort of 3 components, sort of pre-virtual reality, during virtual reality, and post-virtual reality. So pre-virtual reality, this is really about screening people appropriately. Virtual reality, 3D immersive virtual reality, has some special components, screening components compared with traditional research. So, for example, you want to make sure you don't have people showing up that are prone to motion sickness or that have experienced a recent neck or spine injury, because, of course, you want them to be able to move their heads around and look around. You don't want them to have significant eye problems or even one eye. Yes, I actually had someone show up for a study once, and as they were putting the goggles on, they said, hey, you know, I have one glass eye. Is that going to be a problem? So, of course, they can't see stereoscopically. You know, these are things to screen out for. And also consider potentially screening out hardcore video gamers. Virtual reality, especially now that it is really just breaking into the consumer market, people that are really into hardcore video gaming have a particular interest and fixation on virtual reality technology. And if you have someone coming in to do a market research study about insurance or shopping in a grocery store or something like that, you don't want to have a hardcore gamer show up and just spend most of his time thinking about the specific brand of goggles you're using or software or that sort of thing. So when they're in virtual reality, you want to set their expectations appropriately. We tend to not tell people that they're going to go into quote-unquote virtual reality. That's sort of a sexy, futuristic term. We instead say they're going to go through a 3D video experience. And then we want to give them up to a minute of looking around in virtual reality and becoming accustomed to the simulation before we have them do anything, just to let them settle into this new communications medium. And then finally, when they get out of virtual reality, we want to give them a brief opportunity to just express their thoughts about the technology and the experience in general before we immediately start probing into the business objectives. You know, we don't want somebody, you know, waiting to tell us about how much they thought the goggles were cool when we want them focusing on packages that they were looking at in virtual reality. And so we provide them a brief opportunity to express those feelings and then tell them we'll move on. So I have some shots here. This is a classic demo that we do where we have people go up the side of a big skyscraper. And before we do that, we give people a moment at the street level to look around, take in their surroundings, feel the wall that's behind them that represents the skyscraper. Another example from a project we did for Travelers Insurance that involved having risk manager professionals fly around virtual warehouses, identifying at-risk behaviors. And so we actually gave them a little training orientation exercise where we had them just practice using the hand controllers and these motions in a really slow fashion before we actually had them go through the experiment. Okay, the next lesson, and another example of someone's reaction coming out of the goggles, just feeling really overstimulated, wanting to tell us something about the experience they went through. So the next lesson, lesson 4, is maximize your opportunities for insights. Really, people should be spending just a small bit of time on the research study actually in virtual reality. The fact of the matter is they're actually coming somewhere and spending time with you. Maximize that time, the efficiency of that time. Have them take a pre and post survey. Collect proxemic data. That's where people are looking, where people are moving. Collect and analyze that information while they're in virtual reality. Collect, record, and analyze prompted unprompted open ends while they're in virtual reality. Sometimes we find the things that people say just off the cuff in the moment provide the greatest opportunities for insight. And then finally, when they get out of virtual reality, even if they're just going to be taking a quant survey, consider having them go through a little in-depth interview, or having them go through a focus group. Have them reflect on these experiences they just had. You will find, and we have found, that people reflect on experiences to virtual reality in ways that are so similar to how they would reflect on experiences in the real world, compared to reflecting on concept descriptions or just static pictures. This is an example from a study we did for H&R Block that was actually featured on our national news here in the United States, where people came in, they went through a virtual brick and mortar experience, but we had them taking pre and post surveys to measure changes in brand perceptions and attitudes. And then we actually had people 3 at a time go through these focus groups together to talk about the experiences that they had in this simulated tax preparation experience. Okay, last lesson, go beyond market research. Virtual reality is such a powerful communications medium. It has this power to not only stimulate the non-conscious and emotions for research purposes, but can actually go on to change and influence behaviors and attitudes. This is something that's been such a powerful revelation for us that we've actually spun off a separate company called Applied VR, which is all about using this technology and our learnings and working with our clients, not for the purposes of research, but to actually create applications that can change the behavior of their customers or people in the world to do good things in the world or do good things for business. So you've developed a virtual reality simulation. You've invested this time and effort to create this. Repurpose it for additional research. Repurpose that store environment that you created for other types of research, or use that same environment to help sell to other stakeholders in your organization or channel partners. You know, this pharmaceutical example, they could take the simulation we created to their grocery store or pharmacy channels and put the goggles on their stakeholders and say, hey, we're going to show you what we mean by having your pharmacy approach how they lay out the pharmacy in a certain way. We want you to experience that viscerally, not just through a PowerPoint document. Or consider the potential for public relations and marketing for virtual reality. It's such a new thing that H&R Block study that I mentioned got us national press coverage just for doing a market research study using an innovative communications platform. We've worked with an automotive company for taking a virtual reality application for safe driving and actually rolling that out to consumers to get them to learn about safe driving habits and technology. I mentioned Travelers before. They're now developing a suite of safety applications with us that use virtual reality to teach people about all sorts of safe behavior around the home. And the national press coverage and PR benefit that H&R Block got from doing our study. And we're now working with several hospitals right now. This is an example management applications using virtual reality. So this is going beyond research, and this is leveraging your expertise, experience, and assets in virtual reality to do big things in the world or for your business. And so with that, there are the 5 lessons again, and what I really leave you with is just to think big with this medium and partner with the right people and the right experts in this medium. This is a new communications technology. There's a lot of ways to spend a lot of time, money, and effort and do things wrong or disorient people or make them sick. And like any transformational technology like mobile phones, social media, the web, it has the potential to do so much good in the world and for research, but to also do bad things when it's poorly understood and used. And so with that, thank you, everyone. And I turn it back to Ray.